You think you know the Bible's cast of characters. You've heard the stories since childhood, sorted and sanitized. But open the text directly, and something shifts. The biblical narrative contains beings that don't fit, not metaphors, not poetic language dressed up as fact. The text describes them in clinical anatomical detail. Most readers skip past them entirely. Tradition has painted over what the text actually says. This isn't about conspiracy or hidden scrolls. It's about reading what's already there. Before Adam walked the earth, before the flood, before most of recorded biblical history, creatures existed. Creatures that science has no category for, creatures that the text refuses to call human. The Sunday school version leaves them out. But God's creation was stranger and larger than we've been taught. What if the Bible isn't being cryptic? What if it's being literal and we've simply stopped listening? This is what happens when you read the text, not the commentary, not the theological tradition. The actual text. 5 creatures emerge from the pages, 5 beings that predate Adam's dominion entirely. Each one is described with specificity. Each one falls outside what science expects to find. Let's look at what the text actually says, and why the absence of explanation matters. The first creature appears in Genesis 3. We call it the serpent, but that's not what it was. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field. The text begins with a comparison, not an identification. It speaks, it argues, it possesses reasoning. It moves with intention, not instinct. The Genesis text describes it standing upright. Some translations say it was subtle, crafty, deliberate, self-aware. After the curse, it became serpentine. Before the curse, it was something else entirely. Science has no category for this. We classify animals by physical form and behavior, but this creature changes its physical form. The curse alters not just its body, but its entire nature. What biological process allows that? What evolutionary pathway produces a being that can be reconstituted? The text doesn't soften this, it states it as fact, then moves on. God said to the serpent, "On your belly you will go." This implies it walked upright before. Genesis doesn't call it a demon. It doesn't call it a fallen angel or a spiritual being. It calls it a creature of the field, biological, physical, real. Yet nothing we've excavated matches this description. No fossil record shows a transition from upright intelligence to ground-dwelling serpent. This is where the Sunday school version fails. We've been told it's simply evil incarnate symbolism only. But the text is describing something that was a being with a body, with form, with material existence. Then it was cursed into a different form, and science cannot explain the creature it once was. The second being enters the text through Job's trial. God doesn't appear to comfort Job with theology. He appears and asks, "Do you have the strength of God?" Then he does something unexpected. He describes creatures to Job as if Job should know them, not as if they're myths or metaphors. "Behold Behemoth, which I made as I made you, God." Compares the creature to Job's own existence. The description is architectural, not zoological. His strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. The text uses engineering language, not biological language. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. A tail like a cedar, not a hippo's tail, not an elephant's. He is the chief of the ways of God. God calls him the pinnacle of created things. Yet we have no fossil record of anything matching this. Paleontologists have proposed dinosaurs, extinct megafauna animals we cannot name. None of them fit the description cleanly. The tail like a cedar, the bones like bronze, the unmatchable strength. Job is supposed to recognize what God is describing, which means it existed in Job's living memory, or at minimum in the collective memory of Job's world. A creature known, documented, real. The scientific problem is acute here. We have no skeleton, no fossilized remains, no genetic material. But we have a detailed description from someone who lived in the presence of someone who saw it. Science requires evidence. The text is evidence, but not the kind laboratories accept. Yet the text refuses to treat it as myth, and the absence of our evidence doesn't erase its presence. The third creature is Leviathan, more dangerous, more deliberately kept secret by the text. God describes it to Job again. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? What follows is the most militaristic description of any animal in Scripture, not zoological military. Its scales are like strong shields shut up close, as with a seal's scales, as armor plating. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. Interlocking, impenetrable defense. Its sneezings flash forth light, and its eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn fire. Literal fire. The Hebrew is unambiguous on this point. Leviathan produces fire from its nostrils. From its mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap out. Not metaphor, flame, literal combustion. Science has no explanation for a living creature that breathes fire. We have no biological model for this. In some biblical passages, Leviathan is described as multi-headed, in others as untamable by any human or angelic force. God is the only power that can restrain it, not defeat it, restrain it. This is described in Isaiah 27. As a future event, God will punish Leviathan at the end of all things. The creature is real enough to require divine punishment. Not imprisonment, not destruction, punishment. In that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. The text treats it as a real creature that will exist until the final day. Science cannot classify anything that produces actual fire from its body. We have no mammal, reptile, or sea creature that fits. Yet the text assumes Job knows what it is, assumes Job has heard of it, feared it, or seen its reports. The pretense of poetic language dissolves here. The text is describing something with military specificity, something dangerous enough that God speaks of it in terms of divine restraint. The fourth being appears in Genesis 3:24. After Adam and Eve are expelled from Eden, he drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed cherubim and a flaming sword. But the text describes the cherubim in clinical detail, not winged beings in white robes. In Ezekiel's vision, a cherub is described as follows. Each had 4 faces, human, lion, ox, and eagle, 4 wings, eyes, covering every surface movement, coordinated with perfect precision, not organic in the way we understand organisms' movement. That suggests mechanism, not biology. The text describes them as physical guardians, not spiritual manifestations or symbolic representations. They hold an actual flaming sword, rotating fire that guards the physical tree of life. Were these created before Adam? The text places them at the gate of Eden. Eden existed before Adam ate from the tree. The cherubim were already stationed when expulsion became necessary. This suggests they were created in preparation. The garden was built, knowing it would need to be guarded, knowing what would happen, knowing it would require beings of this kind. Science cannot classify a creature with 4 functional faces. Multiple independent neural systems would be required. A skeletal structure that supports 4 faces, 8 wings, perfect perception, eyes distributed across the entire body surface. This defies everything we understand about vertebrate anatomy. Yet the text describes it with such precision that it must be observable. Ezekiel describes these beings, and his response is trauma. The sight of them breaks his understanding of what a body can be. The cherubim of Eden are real enough to require divine protection, real enough that humanity was expelled specifically because they were there. The 5th creature appears before the flood, Genesis 6:1-4. one of the most disputed passages in Scripture, when men began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair. The Hebrew term is Bene Elohim, literally sons of God, not human offspring, not metaphors. A distinct class of beings created separately, existing outside human taxonomy, and they took as wives such of them as they chose. Biological reproduction occurred between two distinct species. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The offspring were giants literally and biologically. Some readings describe them as fallen angels. Other interpretations suggest a separate created species. The text itself doesn't specify their nature, only that they were non-human and capable of reproduction with humans. Science would call this impossible species, don't interbreed unless they're closely related genetically. Yet this is described as historical fact, not allegory, not theological metaphor. The narrative doesn't pause to explain. It moves on as if the audience already understands. This suggests that the original audience did understand that pre-Adamic and pre-flood beings were part of their worldview, part of their lived experience, or collective memory, not secrets hidden in cryptic language. God's response to these unions is swift. My spirit shall not abide in man forever. He limits humanity's lifespan. Then he sends the flood. Why? Because the boundary between created kinds was being erased, because beings outside human taxonomy were corrupting human lineage. The flood was a reset, a return to the original order. Before the flood, multiple species of intelligent beings coexisted, human and non-human, created and uncreated, fallen and unfallen. Science has no framework for this evolutionary biology, cannot accommodate deliberate separate creation events, yet the text describes them as fact, existing, breeding, producing offspring. Real enough that divine judgment was necessary. Real enough that God erased them from the earth. Let's step back and see what emerges. The Bible's pre-Adamic world contained beings we have no category for, creatures that science cannot explain, not because the text is cryptic or poetic, but because the text is literal and our science has no language for what it describes. The serpent that walked upright, the Behemoth, with bones like bronze, the Leviathan that breathed fire, the Cherubim with 4 faces and distributed consciousness, the sons of God who bred with humanity. All of them are described with specificity. All of them fall outside what we expect. All of them suggest a creation far stranger than we've been taught. The Sunday school version isn't incomplete, it's been simplified into misrecognition. We've turned literal descriptions into symbols. We've made the strange familiar by refusing to let it be strange. But the text doesn't demand this accommodation. It simply describes what was and invites us to recognize the limits of what we think we know. The Bible contains more, creation contained more, and the creatures that walked the earth before Adam were real, documented, and forever beyond our reach. We have the descriptions, we don't have the creatures themselves. But in a world where the text was written to preserve memory, the descriptions are enough. They're evidence of a world we didn't build, a creation we didn't design, and beings we never got to know.